That museum piece belongs in a scrapyard, not on my range. And frankly, ma'am, with all due respect, so do you." The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed across the firing line. Staff Sergeant Rex Thorne, a man whose muscles seemed to have muscles, smirked as a ripple of nervous laughter spread through the platoon of young, eager sniper candidates. They were all chiseled from the same block of youthful arrogance, idolizing the swagger of their instructor. The crowd laughed. He had given them permission. Before them stood a woman who looked profoundly out of place. Sergeant Major Ava Morgan was not a warrior forged in the posters of recruitment offices. Her hair, pulled back in a severe, regulation bun, was streaked with a distinguished gray at the temples. She wore thin, wire-rimmed glasses, and her frame was lean, almost slight, lost in the baggy camouflage utilities. She looked more like a logistics officer on the verge of retirement, someone who battled spreadsheets and supply requisitions, not insurgents and impossible odds. She offered no reaction to the insult, her face a placid mask of neutrality. Her gaze wasn't on Thorne or the snickering soldiers, but on the rifle he had just contemptuously shoved into her hands. It was a monstrosity, a Franken rifle cobbled together from the boneyard of the armory. An old M24 receiver, a barrel with more wear than a drill sergeant's boots, and a scope whose optics were known to fog in a light breeze. It was a rifle meant to fail, a tool of humiliation. But when the visiting general, watching from the observation tower 200 yards away, saw her stance, he leaned forward, a flicker of forgotten memory in his eyes. He saw not an old woman, but a posture as solid and unyielding as the granite bedrock beneath the base. A perfect union of bone, muscle, and earth. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven through action, type competence below. Thorne continued his performance, his voice booming with the unearned authority of a man who has never been truly tested. This is the final qualification, ladies and gentlemen. The 3,000-yard shot. The shot that separates the shooters from the operators. It requires the best gear, the best training, and the peak physical conditioning of a warrior in their prime. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the young men before pointedly landing back on Morgan. It is not a task for the administratively inclined. The insult was clear, a public declaration that she was a paper pusher, a relic trespassing on sacred ground. The young soldiers shuffled their feet, their amusement now mixed with a palpable sense of pity and second-hand embarrassment. They saw a woman being systematically dismantled in front of them, and their pack mentality, loyal to the alpha, forbade any intervention. Morgan, however, remained a statue of calm. Her hands, which Thorne had mentally dismissed as soft and clerical, moved over the broken rifle with a practiced, almost reverent slowness. She didn't inspect it for flaws, she communed with it. Her thumb traced the worn grain of the wooden stock, a relic from a bygone era of warfare. She checked the action, not with a violent rack, but with a smooth, silent pull that spoke of 1,000 hours of muscle memory. Her focus was so absolute, so intensely internalized, that the world around her seemed to fade into an irrelevant buzz. The heat shimmering off the range, the distant pop of other rifles, Thorne's incessant, arrogant monologue, it was all just noise. Her silence was not weakness, it was a fortress. It was the profound, unshakable confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone, least of all to a loud, insecure boy playing soldier. She was not there to compete with him or his protégés. She was there to do a job, a simple recertification required by a regulation she likely helped write 2 decades ago. The broken rifle in her hands was not an insult. It was merely a variable, another problem in a long, complex equation of windage, elevation, and physics that she had mastered before Thorne had even learned to shave. The command to commence the qualification crackled over the range speakers. A series of 20 digital targets, small steel plates at an almost unimaginable 3,000 yards, would be activated in a random, rapid sequence. Hitting even one was considered a mark of distinction. Hitting 5 would make you a legend on the base. Hitting all 20 was a statistical impossibility, a theoretical limit of human and mechanical perfection that existed only in textbooks. The young snipers took their positions, their state-of-the-art M210 enhanced sniper rifles looking like technological marvels next to the relic Morgan held. Thorne stood behind the line, arms crossed, a smug look on his face, waiting for the inevitable failure that would validate his prejudice. He watched Morgan, expecting fumbling and uncertainty. Instead, he saw a symphony of quiet competence. She didn't flop into position. She flowed into the prone, becoming part of the landscape. She built her nest with an economy of motion that was hypnotic to watch. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation. She adjusted the bipod, settled the stock into the pocket of her shoulder, and her breathing immediately slowed to a deep, rhythmic cadence. Her eye met the old, flawed scope, and for a long moment, she was perfectly still. She wasn't just looking. She was reading the story of the air between her and the target, deciphering the subtle language of the mirage, feeling the gentle kiss of the crosswind on her cheek. Her hands, steady as stone, made microscopic adjustments to the elevation and windage knobs, her fingers dancing with a familiarity that suggested they were extensions of her own mind. She ignored the first target activation and the second, letting her body and the rifle acclimate to become a single, unified weapon system. Thorne scoffed audibly. Having trouble, Sergeant Major? The targets are the little white things way out there. Then it began. There was no dramatic preamble, no theatrical deep breath. There was only the quiet, methodical execution of a master craftsman. Her finger moved to the trigger. Thump crack. The old rifle kicked against her shoulder, a familiar and welcome pressure. An eternity seemed to pass in the 35 seconds it took for the bullet to travel, and then a faint but distinct ping echoed back from the target zone, followed by a green flash on the monitor in the control tower. A hit. A murmur went through the line of younger shooters. A lucky shot, they thought. Thorne's smirk remained. Then, another target activated. Morgan's movements were fluid, impossibly economical. She worked the bolt action with a single, smooth motion, her eye never leaving the scope. She acquired the new target, her breathing hitched for a single, controlled moment. Thump crack, ping. Another hit. The murmurs on the line ceased. The third target. Thump crack, ping. The fourth. Thump crack, ping. A profound silence began to descend upon the range. The other shooters had stopped firing, their own qualifications forgotten. They were now spectators to something they didn't understand. The rhythm was mesmerizing, terrifying in its perfection. The bolts sliding home, the controlled breath, the gentle squeeze, the sharp report of the rifle, the impossibly long wait, and the inevitable, validating ping of steel on steel. 5, 6, 7. Thorne's smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. His arms had uncrossed, hanging uselessly at his sides. He was witnessing not just skill, but a complete defiance of the laws of physics as he understood them. That rifle, that shooter, that distance, the combination was impossible. 10, 11, 12. The air grew thick with a tension that was almost religious in its intensity. This was no longer a qualification. It was a sermon delivered in brass and lead. Each ping was a refutation of Thorne's arrogance. Each perfect shot was a testament to the quiet professionalism he had mocked. 15, 16, 17. The only sound on the range was the rhythmic cycle of her rifle and the distant echo of her success. 18, 19, 20. After the 20th ping, a silence so complete, so absolute, fell over the range that it was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, first at the monitor displaying a perfect score, then at the small, gray-haired woman who was now calmly clearing her weapon, her face as impassive as it had been from the start. Thorne could only whisper a single, broken phrase. No way. That's not possible. A heavy tread on the gravel broke the spell. General Wallace, a man whose presence commanded respect without a single word, had descended from the observation tower and was walking onto the firing line. His face, a roadmap of campaigns from a lifetime of service, was stern and unreadable. The young soldiers instinctively stiffened to attention. Thorne snapped a salute, his face pale with shock and a dawning, terrible sense of dread. The general ignored him completely. He walked past the line of high-tech rifles and multi-thousand-dollar optics until he stood directly over Sergeant Major Morgan, who was methodically packing her gear, her task complete. She looked up, her expression calm, and gave the general a short, respectful nod. "General," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Wallace didn't return the nod. Instead, he looked from her to the cobbled-together rifle, then back to her. A slow, knowing smile touched the corners of his mouth, a smile of recognition, of rediscovery. He turned his gaze upon Staff Sergeant Thorne, and the temperature on the range seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Staff Sergeant." The general's voice was low, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "Report," Thorne stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. "Sir?" "Sergeant Major Morgan, just..." She completed the qualification, "sir." A perfect score. The general's eyes narrowed. "With what weapon, Staff Sergeant?" Thorne swallowed hard, unable to look at the rifle. With the training rifle, sir." The M24 variant." General Wallace let the silence hang for a moment, letting Thorne's inadequacy steep in the humid air. Then he spoke again, his voice resonating with the weight of history. "You are a sniper instructor, Staff Sergeant. You are supposed to be an expert in your field, a student of its history, its weapons, its legends. Does the name Ava Morgan mean anything to you?" Thorne's face was a blank canvas of confusion. "Sir, no, sir. I've never heard the name." The general shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He turned to address the entire platoon, his voice now rising to a command tone that had silenced command tents and briefing rooms for 40 years. "You stand on a range built on the knowledge of giants, and you don't even know their names. You hold rifles you don't understand, and you mock the very person who perfected them." He pointed a finger not at Morgan, but at the sleek, modern M210 rifles used by the other soldiers. "That weapon you hold, the M210 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, the finest long-range instrument in our arsenal? The one with the revolutionary barrel harmonics and the proprietary en-bloc clip system? She designed it. She led the team that built it. She holds the patents." A collective gasp went through the platoon. Thorne looked as if he had been physically struck. The general wasn't finished. He gestured towards Morgan. "This is Sergeant Major Ava Ghost Morgan. She was the first woman to graduate and the first to top the class at the SOTIC Level 1 course, back when most of you were in diapers. Her final test involved assembling a rifle from a box of random parts, in the dark, and then making a cold-bore shot at a mile. She did it in under 3 minutes." He let that sink in. "Her operational record is almost entirely classified, but I can tell you this. The official record for the longest confirmed combat engagement in the history of this army, the one you all whisper about and tell stories about, the number in that file is a lie. The real number is 300 yards longer, and it belongs to her. It remains classified because the technology she used on that shot is still 20 years ahead of what our enemies think is possible." He looked directly at Thorne, his eyes burning with cold fire. "She is not here to qualify, Staff Sergeant. She is here on my personal invitation to audit this program and recertify its master instructors. Instructors like you, then." In a gesture that sent a shockwave of awe through every soldier present, General Wallace, a 3-star general, squared his shoulders, brought his hand up in a crisp, formal salute, and held it. "It is an honor to see you on the range again, Sergeant Major. Your standards have not slipped." The story of what happened on the range that day spread not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled through the barracks in hushed, reverent tones, across encrypted networks between operators in distant lands, and into the institutional memory of the sniper community. The tale of the quiet, gray-haired sergeant major and the broken rifle became an instant legend. The young soldiers who had snickered at Thorne's insults now looked at Morgan with a mixture of fear and profound admiration. They avoided her gaze, but they watched her every move, trying to absorb some of her quiet dignity, her unshakable competence. The range itself was unofficially, then officially, renamed. A small, brass plaque was affixed to the control tower door. Morgan Line, it became a place of pilgrimage for shooters, a reminder that the spirit of the warrior was not defined by the size of their muscles or the volume of their voice, but by the precision of their actions. Staff Sergeant Thorne underwent a transformation that was both painful and necessary. He was publicly humbled, his authority stripped away not by a formal reprimand, but by the undeniable truth of Morgan's skill. The foundation of his identity, built on a brittle framework of arrogance, had been pulverized. A few days later, he found Sergeant Major Morgan in the armory, meticulously cleaning the very rifle she had used to dismantle his world. He approached her not as an instructor, but as a supplicant. Head bowed, he offered a halting, sincere apology. He didn't make excuses. He owned his ignorance, his prejudice, his disrespect. He concluded by asking the one thing his old self would have found unthinkable. "Sergeant Major, will you teach me?" Morgan paused her work, looking at the young man for a long moment. She saw not the arrogant bully from the range, but a humbled soldier who had been given a harsh but vital lesson. She saw potential buried beneath layers of ego. She gave a single, slow nod. "Be on my range tomorrow. 0500. Bring a notepad. We start with the fundamentals." Her acceptance was not forgiveness in the traditional sense. It was a professional courtesy, an acknowledgement that he was ready to learn the true meaning of the craft. Her mentorship was as quiet and methodical as her shooting. There were no grand speeches or motivational platitudes. Her lessons were taught in the silent language of action. She taught them to listen to the wind, not just measure it. She taught them to respect the rifle as a partner, not just a tool. She broke down the complex art of long-range marksmanship into its constituent, perfectible parts: stance, grip, sight picture, breath control, trigger squeeze. She drilled them relentlessly, not on impossible shots, 1,000 times on the basics. Her philosophy was simple. Perfection in the fundamentals is the only path to competence under pressure. She never once mentioned the incident with Thorn or her legendary past. Her legacy was not something to be spoken of. It was something to be demonstrated, to be passed on through rigorous, ego-less instruction. The 20 spent brass casings from her perfect score were collected from the range. General Wallace took one for his desk, a personal memento of the day he saw a living legend at work. The other 19 were given to the sniper school. The base commander had one mounted on a polished wooden plaque. It was placed in the main briefing room for every new class of sniper candidates to see. Below it, a simple inscription read, "Morgan Line, 3,000 yards, 20 rounds. Competence is a quiet professional." The plaque became the school's most sacred artifact. It was a symbol of the ultimate standard, a permanent and silent rebuke to arrogance. It told a story more powerful than any war movie or recruitment poster. It said that the truest measure of a warrior was not in the medals they wore on their chest, but in the unwavering steadiness of their hands and the quiet humility in their heart. The story of Thorne's humiliation and subsequent tutelage under Morgan became a core part of the school's unwritten curriculum, a cautionary tale passed from senior instructors to new recruits about the dangers of assumption and the virtue of respect. A year passed. The culture at the sniper school had fundamentally shifted. The swagger and chest-thumping bravado had been replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. The instructors, led by a reformed and deeply humbled Rex Thorne, now emphasized discipline over ego, precision over power. Thorne stood before a new class of eager candidates, the sun glinting off the plaque on the wall behind him. In his hands, he held the old, worn M24, the Franken rifle that had become both a symbol of his greatest shame and his most profound lesson. He didn't begin the lesson with talk of ballistics or wind charts. He began by telling a story. "Before you touch a single round," he said, his voice steady and respectful, "you need to understand what this school is about. It's about a standard set on this very range by a true master." He recounted the events of that day, not sparing his own arrogance or ignorance. He told them about the quiet sergeant major, the public insults, and the 20 perfect shots that followed. He held up the old rifle. "This weapon," he said, "is the most important teaching tool we have. It looks broken. It looks worthless. I made the mistake of judging it by its appearance, just as I judged the person holding it. And she used it to teach me, and all of us, that the weapon doesn't make the warrior. The warrior makes the weapon. Your gear, your youth, your strength, none of it matters if you lack the one essential ingredient. Quiet competence." The legend of Ava Ghost Morgan had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth that shaped the next generation of shooters. She had long since retired, disappearing back into the civilian world as quietly as she had operated in the shadows. She left behind no statues, no buildings named in her honor, only a standard of excellence that echoed in the rhythmic crack of rifles on the range now named for her. Her legacy was not a name carved in stone or a portrait hung on a wall. It was something far more powerful and enduring. It was in the steady hands of a young sniper, thousands of miles away, calmly controlling his breathing before taking a critical shot. It was in the humble attitude of an instructor who now valued his students' questions more than his own voice. It was in the culture of a community that had learned to value substance over style, action over words. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a record book. It's what continues forward in the actions of those you've inspired. It is the quiet, unseen force that raises the standards for everyone, that turns a simple skill into a noble craft, and that reminds us that the most powerful statement is often the one that is never spoken, but demonstrated with flawless, undeniable precision. The world is full of loud voices demanding respect, but true honor is always, and only, given to those who have the quiet confidence to earn it through their deeds. The lesson of Morgan's line was not about shooting. It was about character. It was about the moral clarity that comes from a lifetime of discipline, the profound strength found in humility, and the simple truth that a person's worth is ultimately measured not by the noise they make, but by the impact they have. And sometimes, that impact is best delivered from 3,000 yards away, with a broken rifle, 20 times in a row. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.